Welcome to the Sustainability Nugget podcast. I am Rarasu Maraibi.
And I'm Tosin Folorunsho.
On this podcast, we learn about sustainability by discussing various related topics while focusing on three pillars: the economy, the society, and the environment.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Sustainability Nugget. Today, I have a very awesome guest with me. All my guests are awesome, but I'm just a fan of Bonnie because I think she's great. She has awesome experience in corporate sustainability. And okay, let me officially introduce her. So Bonnie, my guest today is Bonnie Nixxon, and she has held many high-profile positions at the global forefront of new low-carbon, resource-protected, and just economy. And today she's the director of sustainability at the Long Beach Container Terminal, which is the greenest and cleanest marine terminal in the world. And you get to know more details about what makes it the cleanest and greenest. Bonnie is a lifelong learner dedicated to global education, digitization, and the use of new and emerging technologies to help accelerate sustainability and advance human rights. She obtained a bachelor's from Penn State in sociology and a master's degree in learning technologies. And she's currently completing a PhD at Pepperdine University in global leadership and change. And her thesis explores the intersection of environmental injustice and modern slavery in complex supply chains. She also teaches sustainable supply chain at Harvard and UCLA Extensions. Hi, Bonnie. Welcome to Sustainability Nuggets podcast.
Hi, thank you so much, Tosin. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Definitely. So can you share, let's start with your story. How did you get here? Where did you start from?
Yeah. I mean, thank you for that nice introduction, and you pretty much covered everything that I'm doing right now, and it's been definitely a journey. And I would have to, if I start with the beginning, I really originally got interested in sustainability when I was at college. So I grew up in the New York, New Jersey area, in pretty much an urban area, and it was really, for me, every time I went outside and went up to the mountains or went down the Jersey Shore or went to a lake, I just could feel like I could breathe and
right
out of the city. And I just was like, I always felt like nature was home to me. And so that's how I felt all through my childhood. And then I was going to be a lawyer. I wanted to be a lawyer in social justice and for poverty issues and things and fairness. And that's really what I thought I would do. And when I went to Penn State, I was pre-law. But while I was at Penn State, 3 Mile Island happened, which was a nuclear power plant leak. And that was very scary. And I was involved in student government, and I got to just hear some of the dialogue between, the power plant and the media and the administration. We at Penn State were going to actually be one of the facilities where if the immune compromised or women and children, might come and use our auditoriums and our cafeterias and our facilities. And so for me, that was a really scary thing. I was like, well, how have we done this to ourselves? And why are we in this place? And is nuclear power the right way to energize our utilities if it's going to be this dangerous? And so I started to just do my own research on that. And that's what originally really got me involved. I ended up going to school some in England and then moving to Amsterdam, where I studied green plans. And that was a really, in the Netherlands, they had really the foresight to think about how do you look at the interdependency of utilities and business and and citizens. And so they brought all of those together, and they were at the time putting many pieces of legislation together. And here in the United States, we were having a really hard time just getting one law passed, like the Clean Water Act or the Clean Air Act. And so I wanted to understand, what did they do differently? And that's kind of, what were some of my initial motivations. And that brought me eventually to Boston, where I worked on the Boston Harbor Cleanup Project, which was water and wastewater. And it was a $6 billion project. And I got to be sort of the head of PR for that. And then moved to San Francisco. I started an environmental planning and communications consultancy. We grew that to about 65 people, with offices in San Francisco, Sacramento, and Washington, D.C. And I worked on a lot of infrastructure, water, waste, water, transportation, solid waste, utility.
And if I may ask, what year was this?
So I started that in 1988. That was 1 year before the Loma Prieta earthquake in San Francisco. And then I did that. I had that position in that company until 2004. There was actually some overlap, and in that we had offices, like I said, also in DC. So we worked on railroad projects and all over the country, and DOE projects and transport, just many different kinds. But that was the period of time that a vice president from Hewlett Packard asked me to come and help design their supply chain social and environmental responsibility program. And to be honest, I initially said, no, I'm not interested. I only work for the public sector. And I want to work on like common good things. And
right.
I was concerned that the private sector was only out for the profit and not going to be good for the public utilities and things like that. And so I initially said no, and he was very persuasive, and I ended up going there. And so for about 6 years, I was actually owning my company and working my company in the public sector, but also designing the whole program for Hewlett Packard. They didn't have a program at that time, and so I was designing it, so
I'm sure many companies didn't have programs like that either. It's now that sustainability and corporate social responsibility is mainstream, right?
Yeah. So I did HP for 13 years. I spent there. I loved the company and I loved the opportunity, and I still do today. Then I got a really cool opportunity with Walmart. And I did that to work in lifecycle assessments and really design to look at like what are the most sold projects in Walmart, and how could we provide guidance to all of their main supply chain and suppliers on doing things differently. And was there. And then I joined Mattel Toys. And that's what brought me to Southern California. And I've been here ever since, doing a lot of the things that you shared in the beginning in my bio. I went back to school, and so now I've been working at the Port of Long Beach.
Awesome. So I'm curious about what made you go back to school after all of that experience and all of those years of work that you've put in.
That's a really great question, because I've always thought that I would continue on and do a master's and a PhD. I love learning. I just love being in the learning environment. I've always been in workshops and getting more skills and getting certificates in conflict resolution and mediation and arbitration and all of these things. But one of the main reasons I went back was that as I was going around the world in supply chain, like in factories and farms and fields and forests and mines, and and plants and refineries. I was going to all these places in 50 countries or so, and I was seeing how the workers, were being treated, or the environment was or wasn't being taken care of, or the health wasn't being protected.
Yeah.
What I noticed was that when I would ask people, like, would you do this, or that frequently they'd be chasing after me and going, well, would you help, or do you have a training, or would you stay, or can you send us stuff, or can you send someone here, or is there a program that you would guide us to, or can we go take a course in this? I was getting that pull all the time. And what became more and more evident to me, it wasn't like people, I was having a feeling like people don't want to wake up in the morning and go, let's pollute and let's exploit people and let's pollute the environment. They just don't know a different way or a better way. And they too are sort of searching. I actually think that when the basic survival instincts are met, like when people have safety and they have food and they have shelter, the urge to grow and to learn is very strong. And I found that to be the case around the world. And then I started to think, this is all about capacity building and capability building. And how can I get more skills in that? And how can I learn how to do it in a more engaging and fun and participatory way, and bring people along? So I went back to school specifically to study how to use learning technologies, to engage people more.
And I found that really interesting, because you are combining technology, and I've listened to you talk many times, which I love to do. Just listening to your experience, your perspective on supply chain, I think is, it's not, people don't really get to see the back end. When you purchase the furniture or the clothes or the computer, you never really know like where all of those parts came from and what work went into making those things. But also just the fact that the learning technologies, like I've seen you being so enthusiastic about technological innovations, but also trying to connect people with it, like ensuring that the people factor is missing. I think, for me, that's really, really interesting and impressive to know that you actually took time out to study that.
Well, one of the things I observed, Tosin, was that I remembered when I was in factories, specifically like in China or Malaysia or Indonesia, and I would watch. I would watch when they would get an hour, they get a lunchtime, or they get off of work, and I'd see them immediately, getting on their phone, and a lot of times I would go over, or I would ask them, or I'd even interview people and say, if you have a day off, or you have a half a day off, or you have what do you do? And they would show me on their phone how they either shop on their phone or they would play games. And in particular, like even the young women, they'd be sort of in these anime types of gaming things, or men would be in gaming. And I always loved gaming myself, I'll be honest. There was a short time that I worked even in a video company, and I would game. And I grew up with like two brothers, and I could never, beat them in anything, but in anything physical, like,
right.
wrestling and softball and baseball and basketball, and all these things I couldn't, but I could beat them in games,
that's cool.
I would play like air hockey and foosball and all of these different games, and I would have fun on it. And it wasn't even so much that I always wanted to win. I just wanted to play. Right. And I thought, I need to understand, if that's where people are going to be, there are 3 billion people today gaming on the planet. 3 billion people. So if there are that many people gaming, I'm like, I need to go there. And I remember that mentality from even when I was working on like a freeway project in Richmond, California. And I was working with, disadvantaged communities and poor communities. and people would go, oh, we're going to do a public meeting. And I think people aren't going to show up at a public. I mean, we need to go to the church and give away a turkey and talk to people, or we need to go on the radio to what they listen to, or we go to their community center or their market and
don't ask them to come to you.
Exactly. We need to go to and I felt that with this gaming thing, and I thought, okay, I started to really study gamification theory. And I thought, this makes total sense. It's rewards, it's present time, interactive, it's cooperation versus competition. And then I started to get really interested in like AI and virtual reality and augmented reality and robotics. And because I could just see that we could use all of these things to, we could really use these things to engage people. And I started to really go after that.
That's awesome. You remind me of my research advisor when I was getting my master's degree. So he got us to get used to Roblox and Sims, and he would say, okay, so imagine instead of the doom and gloom that it looks like we are facing currently, try to imagine what you think a sustainable world means to you, and go into Sims and build that. And I didn't really pay attention to it. I was more into video editing and creative stuff, fashion. But I saw how the approach with my other classmates really got into it. And someone actually built a whole house. She added people to it, a whole city actually. She added people to it, just getting people to get creative within the space that they find comfortable. Like some people, just as you said, like you're having fun playing a game, but you're also solving problems. And while you might feel like, oh, it's all virtual, there's actually learning and thinking and reflection going on while you're doing those things.
Yeah, well, and also you think about it in AI, we use that immensely to in AI to be able to provide more transparency and provide do deep data research and figure out like what with more. I mean, I've always believed that we're going to change things once we're aware of them, right? And if we're not aware, so why not use some of these tools for greater transparency? And so that's one of my real goals, is just how to wake up, get more transparent about this, but also get people engaged, get them participating. And if that means making it fun, then we should do that. I mean, I don't actually think that work has to always be horrible and tedious and
right.
Negative labor. But, that's part of why I work on things like modern slavery, because I've been around the world and I see the level of exploitation that's occurring. And that's sad and unfortunate to me. Yeah.
So going back to just your experience in supply chain and the various companies that you've worked with, how were you able to effectively lead change in those companies? Did you implement policies? Did you create a green team? What did you do to get the conversation started?
I think if you walk in a room or with any group of people and you say, I want to change things, the initial reflex is to push away, right?
Yeah.
I'm not generally really comfortable with change. To do it, I think, gracefully, and you have to do it in a way that they feel they can be part of it. And I think that's true of any sort of really solid change management program, is acknowledging and listening to the way they do it now, and then going, is there something I can do to build on this? So I remembered when I started the supply chain program in HP, what I did was I said, look, I can't imagine that how we do supply chain around the world is going to be similar to in Brazil versus Mexico versus Eastern Europe versus India versus Africa versus Southeast Asia versus China. Like it's all going to be different in Eastern Europe. And so I went around the world and I would spend time with the procurement people. And I did this thing called a day in the life of a procurement person. And just to look at in Brazil or in Eastern Europe. And I saw the systems and tools they used and what they had built. And I embraced those and accepted those and said, okay, how can I build on top of that? So that I'm not just making your job more difficult. I'm adding an element to your job. And so let's look at, and can I help train you in this? And can you train me in this so that I can do a better job for you? And so that's really the way I started the program. And then I recognized that in most really good, solid business management programs, like we have things called like ISO, the International Standards Organization, or solid management systems, or like lean manufacturing, or Six Sigma. Like these are all programs that are based on root cause systems thinking, where you're actually stopping and going, okay, what are the targets and metrics? Who's in charge? How do we measure this? What do we do in the case of a problem? What is, our time frame for this? And it's just a very systematic, solid way of thinking through things. So I believe that you start with a set of standards, goals, rules that you set, and then you monitor them, and then you verify them, and then you report and or disclose on them. And then you have capacity building or capability building, or learning as foundational for all of those things. And when you do that well and right, it's not a linear process. You don't like have a standard, then you monitor, then you verify. You do that, but then what you find is whatever you learn from the verification or you learn from the reporting, you bring back in and you go, okay, how do we change the standard now? How do we monitor how do we bring due diligence in a way that's a little bit different? And so I think that's that's what's really positive, is that you can, you can think of it more spherically than linear.
Like from a procurement officer, what keeps in my mind was, do you have records of that? Can that be like a series? And you'd offer as templates, for people to, I guess people especially that are in supply chain, to be able to something to refer back to and learn from, especially if you're dealing with global supply chain management. I find that interesting.
I mean, I do. I have embedded a lot of that into my courses at UCLA and Harvard, and as I teach supply chain or I lecture on it, I've embedded that thinking, because it was that thinking that enabled me to build what we called a supplier engagement model. And that model was, to this day, I'm trying to think of when I created that initially. It was with a colleague of mine from Microsoft. I was with Hewlett Packard and she was from Microsoft, and she knew this tool called Visio. And I had the strategic, foundation from having done this for a couple of years in my mind. And she just sort of interviewed me. And I said, okay, the first thing you do is you got to do a risk assessment, and you do, and you really have to do a risk assessment like 4 times during the process. You want to do it in the beginning to determine what's the population I'm going to focus on. Then you want to do it once you've given them a questionnaire and introduced them to the program and to the code of conduct and to the scope, to determine whether they get it and or they're vulnerable for different reasons, like i.e. if you've asked them how many formal employees do they have versus contract workers. That's like a big deal, because if they're contract workers, they're not paying them the same. They don't have the benefits. They're more vulnerable. They're likely traveling from one location to another. They're migrating. That's one of the root cause issues. migration.
Yeah.
So so that moves you to the next phase where, and then you may monitor them and walk through this whole questionnaire process with them and see who's in charge. And it's at that point you want to assess their risk again, because now you determine, are they really committed? Do they have the right people working on this? Do they need training? Do they say yes on this question and no on this question, which shows this huge gap? And so that's the third level. And then you want to come back in at the end and say, you know what? I've given them all these opportunities and all these tools, but they're still not getting it. So I'm going to have to maybe let them go. I might have to cut this relationship. And so I think that's, but you have training all throughout, and you have auditing and monitoring and verification, and you ask them to report as well. So I think there's a lot of opportunities, for this, for supplier engagement, for education, for due diligence monitoring, for risk assessment tools. And so we created from having done this day in the life of the procurement.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah. And now it would be day in the life of a supply chain professional, because we call procurement people supply chain now,
Right.
really emphasized and focused on that. But I should say that, I really do understand the broader space of, remember, you asked me how my career started. We didn't call it sustainability. And we called it environmental protection. And we were protecting the air, water, the land. We were making sure people were healthy, their health and their safety were protected. And then we were looking at labor practices, like the basic HR types of things, right? And then, so that for years went on. And then we started to call it sustainability. And then now you're starting to see this evolution into ESG, social governance, and regeneration. And that's not to say that sustainability, and regeneration are the same thing. I do understand and appreciate the nuanced differences. But at the end of the day, Tosin, it's like we are still just trying to protect our environment and not exploit our people.
I think that's what it goes back to. You remember the three pillars: the people, the society, and the profit, the people, and the environment. But more so, the people and the environment should come before the profit.
Yeah, that's the thing. I to be honest, I do, with the work I do today, I emphasize the fact that I'm working at a place where the economy and the environment can thrive together. And I do recognize the importance of solid business, but I will be honest that I think that we have really taken the profit orientation and motive out of we're so deeply committed to that part that we're over the top in what I would probably describe as the need for greed,
Right. And I think that it now has been ingrained into, that's a mindset that you find in every sector when you go to business school. Or I was having a conversation with a fashion student one day, and she said the concept now is you're trained to produce, for mass production, for growth and growth and growth upon growth. And she's like, I'm not cut out for this. I don't think I want to be in this space. Like, I know what I want, the small fashion business, where it doesn't mean it's not successful. It doesn't mean that you're not making an impact. But just this drive, consistent push for more profits, results, metrics,
unchecked growth. I mean, the truth is, the land, just like, has, the planet has a finite amount of resources. And I don't think we've been willing to just accept that. We think that we can do growth at any price. And it's just, that's just not true. And there really are only four things happening here on the planet, if you think about it, that we have to address. And the first is emissions out into the air, from the fossil fuel and man-made activities, petrochemical activities, insecticides, all of these things. So that's the emissions. And if you think of the planet like an egg, it's just the shell of the egg that's cracked and there's holes in. And it's like, so as a result, things going out, things are coming in, more sun, intense sun coming in. The second is the bioaccumulation of non-biodegradable matter, right? It's the rubber, it's the plastics, it's the concrete. It's the things that just don't break down. The third is the mining, drilling, fracking, dredging into the core of the earth. Just like a human body, and that's what the planet is. It's one system. If we were to put knitting needles inside and just keep poking and screwing, it's like all the blood would start coming out, right? Our equilibrium would get lost, our balance, and we wonder, why are we having all these earthquakes and tornadoes and more hurricanes and more? And like, we're tilting we're testing its equilibrium on all levels. We're taking the oil out of the center of it. It's lubricant, just like we would in a body. And then the fourth is we're really affecting the only naturally regenerative process on the planet there is, and that's photosynthesis by deforestation, by taking out trees that provide the oxygen. So it's these four activities. If we were to minimize, reduce, eliminate, change the way we do these four things, we actually could have a self-sustaining place that, and quite frankly, like the planet isn't very emotional about all this. It's like, it'll probably just like go, okay, I'm about to flick you people off like a flea on a dog because I've had enough. And, you're not treating me well, and you've tested me beyond all limits. And now I'm just going to turn back into a gaseous ball of fire like I started. And and you just won't be here, So at the end of the day, it's like we're really affecting our own ability to live and love and play on this incredibly cherished planet that we have, and these gifts we have. For those of us who have traveled around and seen the amazingly beautiful treasures on every continent and met some of the most amazing people, and I think it's just sad. At the end of the day, it's just sad that we're taking such advantage of its gifts.
Yeah, and I think that's where that's why the concept of regeneration is being pushed, because it's really going back to there's a word I like, biomimicry, because it's really going back to study how the earth is able to sustain itself. Like, nothing exactly lives forever, especially when you study plants or animals, living things. Like, they die, and then it's not like the body's there, just they're rotting, and it rots, but then it goes back to the earth, and then it grows into something else. So there's always that circular, that consistent cycle that goes on, which I think is the problem that we have with. I believe you can do business and still be sustainable, but it's just when you're not looking into the full picture. When you're only concerned about making products and then selling them, and then nothing else. Like, you don't care about the byproduct or anything. That's where problem is. And that brings me to my next question, which is for startups, or there's a difference between companies that have just done business as usual and now trying to change, but there are also those that are going into setting up new businesses. There will always be new innovations. How can they implement sustainability or regeneration or circularity into their model from the onset?
I think startups are the place where that is occurring from the outset. I mean, if you go back to, when I was working for Walmart, we looked at like, what are the products they sold the most of? Okay. And then we really were aggregating and looking at detailed life cycle assessments, LCAs, where you're, what is an LCA? It's where you sort of really define, what is the unit. So, if it's this pair of glasses or it's this cell phone is, the unit. And then you say, okay, what is the what is the product boundaries? Am I going to look from this part to this part? And then you really do a life cycle inventory where you're, what are your inputs? What are your outputs? And then you do a deep level, assessment on that so that outcomes your life cycle impacts, right?
Yeah.
And we were doing all of that work and looked at things like the cleaning products, like detergent and surface cleaner were two of the most highly sold things, orange juice and wheat cereal and, and laptops or cell phones were another one. And I think, trying to think of strawberry yogurt was one that we looked at.
Interesting.
But
strawberry.
Yeah, like what they sold the most of, interestingly enough. And I remembered when we were doing the cleaning products, you really, and this is what you find when you really study supply chain, is there's only a few companies that kind of control the marketplace. And so you take cleaning products or detergents and surface cleaners, and it's Unilever, Procter & Gamble, and Dial Henkel. They probably own, 80, 90% of the marketplace. But then you're saying, okay, and they all do things pretty similarly. Here's the way they, are trying to change, and they're being forced and asked to do things more sustainably. So how do they do that? Well, what we did was we looked at like Method and Seventh Generation over here that at that time were startups.
We're startups, yeah.
And they were saying, look, I remembered Adam, the CEO of Method, and he's like, I'm going to make it so that you can drink these products. He's like, because that's what you could do when my grandmother, made like clean the windows with lemon juice and vinegar and, and that's what's in these products. And why have we gone so far away from that to all these chemicals, and that was his concept. And in Seventh Gen at one point, they were looking at, well, how do you make the container compostable? Does it need to be this? How do you recycle this? And so even like looking at, do you have to use, what's the components inside the spray nozzle? Does that have to be this versus, and all of these things. And then, so it was like that we could hold those startups up to Unilever and Henkel and Procter & Gamble and say, can't you do this like this too? And can't you do it?
You already have the resources and the,
if you do it like this, we'll incentivize you. We'll buy more. We'll put your product in a better place on the shelf, or we'll, do specials on it. And I think, so to me, like I think we have to face that, as much as like the startups, like they come into the place to push innovation and to push creativity. And you were absolutely right pointing out like biomimicry. That's Janine Benares. And because companies that can, take the time, put some research into looking at, how could I design this thing differently? How can I do it like nature would do it? An example that she once talked about, I remembered, was like fans. If you look at fans, they're designed with these sort of flat things to go up. And quite frankly, if there's heat that's rising and you're trying to cool the area, sometimes with that design, you're pushing the heat back down.
Yeah.
You're not.
Yes, I can attest to that. I live in the northern part of Nigeria and it gets really hot. And it just gets to a point where the fan you turn on is actually, you notice you're circulating the same here, which is just hot here at this point.
And so, yeah,
For
so
hours.
what they did was they started studying they started studying aspects of nature, and they were looking at flowers. How do they get the ventilation in to them, to grow? And they use the calla lily. I don't know if you remember, the calla lily is like that white spiral flower that we often see at Easter and different things. It's a beautiful flower. And it's a spiral inside, and they designed like some of the industrial fans in that shape.
Oh, in that shape.
And I remembered listening to this gentleman saying they were 68% more efficient. Or they looked at the silkworm that creates this kind of glue that's much stronger than anything we can create in glue, chemicals. That's not to say, oh, let's like create a million silkworms, but we can replicate that process and look at the way they thought. And each one of these frameworks has something to offer, like Cradle to Cradle. Bill McDonnell and Michael Brumgarten, they were saying, look, you maybe can't take one product and always put it back into itself. Like we were able to do that at HP with inkjet cartridges, like take the inkjet cartridge, chop it all up, and put it back in. But we still needed to bring in some virgin materials. And I think that if one thinks through that model in its entirety, they would recognize the best cradle to cradle would be put a bunch of companies together, and my waste can be your raw material. And I very much agree with what you said. And like when you look to nature, there is no waste. Like I just came back from Africa, and I'm watching, the elephants and the Cape buffaloes with the bird on its back that picks off the mites. Or, my favorite was the dung beetle, because here's this beetle that you have the manure or the weight or the poop from the elephant or the rhinoceros that's sitting there in this big clump, and that creates methane, right? Methane gas. We know that from the cow manure out in the fields. Well, the dung beetle goes over there, and it grabs a bunch of that dung, and it starts rolling it, and it rolls it all the way up hills and all of it, and the male is rolling it with his back legs, not even his front legs. He's rolling it backwards. And the female stays on, and she injects her larvae into the middle of this ball of dung. And then they make it bigger and bigger and bigger, and she stays on while the larvae's in there, and it's hatching, and then they find a place for it. So now, guess what? The dung beetle has separated all that dung, because there's hundreds of them, millions of them, and they've separated it out. So now there's no more methane coming out.
That potent thing is
right. That protects the atmosphere, and guess what? That like little baby dung beetle starts to eat the dung, and that's its food too. It's larvae, and it's. I mean, the whole thing is so elegant, and you look and go, why can't we do that? There's no waste in it.
That's my mantra. When I remember when I got into grad school, and I would tell my professor, one of my first assignments, I told him my mantra is nothing is waste. We just haven't found a use for it. And then I also think it's a cultural thing, because where I come from, you mentioned Africa, but like specifically, like different African countries just have a way of ensuring that we keep things in circulation. So even with the fact that, I mean, things might be a little bit different now because we're trying to be westernized in quotes. But, in the past, I knew even when plastic was introduced, we don't just throw them away. So when you finish drinking a bottle of water, for example, we'd have people would pick up those plastic bottles, and we have locally produced drinks that they would, use those plastics for. Or with cassava production, for example, when cassava is processed, the peel is taken off, and then using my house as an example, my dad had a sheep farm, so he used to raise sheep and goat, and people who produced cassava would actually bring the peels to us. Like we had bags of free food, and then there was a whole market for that. Like when those people didn't have stuff, we could go to the market and buy cassava peels. And that was the animal feed. So we did, which is, they're also eating natural, rich starch starchy ingredients. So it's
I remember that, cassava. And I think that, but I do actually think that what happened here, and I wish I knew the genesis and the exact time frame when, we began creating things from petroleum, and in particular, like the plastics and these things that we do use and we seem to be so dependent on and need. But I ask myself, consistently, like, is, this much plastic is just, it's not good. It hasn't been good for us. And yet, like when I listen to Michael and Bill, one thing they do talk about, and they say, like, we wouldn't have a problem if we kept the biosphere is here and the technosphere is here, and we just didn't put them together. We didn't, like, if we had to, we felt we need to have these plastic things or these, that we keep them in there and we don't let them touch. We don't pour them into the environment. We don't environment. And I think, that's what's good about some of these frameworks. Another framework that is powerful is, certainly circularity and the concept that we're talking about, where things can, be made into each other. But the other one is natural capitalism, and that was Amory and Hunter Lovins and Paul Hawken, who's now done Drawdown, which is also another framework. And so when I teach of this, I really do make sure that we take a look at, like I've already talked to you about, those 4 things that happen on the planet. That's the natural step framework. That was out of Sweden. So you've got the natural step, you've got biomimicry, you got natural capitalism, which says, look, we forget the fact that nature is providing us with all these services, and we have not put values on that, and we need to be considering the value of values, and we need to be recognizing that the forest provides a filtration for water, and and there are services, ecosystem services being provided. Put a value on air and on water and on land, and a really high value, and not just think that it can be
something to dump or something to take from.
Exactly. So I think all of these frameworks are so valuable. But I did want to just make sure I went back to your earlier question on startups. I mean, without innovation and without creativity, that's what's so brilliant about, the mind and mankind's ability, or what a man and womankind's ability to solution find. So, I like that word better than problem solve, because it's yes, there are huge problems, but let's get in the mode of like finding solutions, of using that creativity to know that we are ingenious and we are, able to come up with incredible solutions and ways to address, what we maybe didn't know before. Like, I think about MTBE was an additive that we came out and said, oh, this is going to be really great for, gasoline. It's going to be a good thing. But then we were like, wait, it polluted the entire groundwater basin. So there's this thing called, like, what do we call it? Unintended consequences. We make one thing and we make a bigger problem.
Like you think you're solving the problem, but then it creates externalities.
You made a bigger problem. And there was a time where we used to say, hey, you've got chemicals, put them in a drum and put them underground or bring them out into the ocean. And then it's like, oh no, that was not a good idea. We just contaminated the entire groundwater basin and all the soil. We just contaminated. We've got that right here in Southern California, out by Catalina. When DDT was found to be, producing chemical, they said, oh, put it in drums and bring it out in the ocean. And then they brought it out there. And then when they dropped the drum in, it wouldn't sink. So then they hit it with an axe, so it sinks. So now you have all this incredible content, and you've got the seals and the whales and the dolphins, and the amount of DDT in their body and their system and their blubber, it's just like, whoa, what were we thinking? That was not a good.
I think something to, when I think about compostable single-use items, for example, that's something when you think about innovation and even sustainable products, it's important to really, going back to life cycle analysis, what's going to be the end of this product? Let's not just make a product and say, oh, this is a solution, because when you give people compostable items like, oh yeah, finally we can make a sustainable choice, I'm like, well, first of all, these materials require special composting facilities to break them down, which are not readily available. There's like a handful of those facilities currently in the US. And so it goes to landfill. Most of the waste haulers put it in landfill. So it's not a solution in the end. It's compostable. It sounds nice. But it's not.
It's not. And I do think that we need to focus on how to compost and recognize that every food scrap and food thing can actually be put in our green bin, or if we are so motivated to compost, it will make our soil better. It makes it better. And so I think that we have somehow been trained to be this throwaway society, and even the waste managements of the world and the landfill companies, they're like, yeah, it's cheaper to just dig a hole and put it in there. But that is not.
It's not. Because I think it's cheap. We keep our short-sightedness keeps us focused. Short-sightedness, yeah. And this is like, I'm putting everybody in, not just like people. It makes us focus on the money, but it's like, yeah, it's cheap to put it in the landfill, but that's why I love Catherine Hale's book about saving us. We're actually saving ourselves in the end, because when millions of people get affected by the methane and other toxic chemicals leaking into the groundwater, it's long term, right? But
anymore,
then you start paying.
Look at all the healthcare costs. Look at all of the hospital.
So is it really cheap in the end? I don't think so.
No, I think that's what's so exciting about the evolution of ESG, because I think what ESG really represents is, for a long time, if you think about this, I've been doing this since like Penn State happened in 1979. So,
well, that's before I was ever dreamed of before.
Yeah, so that's 43 years I've been thinking about these things. But for like when I got to the private sector and HP and inside corporations, I knew from the outset, I said, if we don't get the CFO and the bookkeepers and the financial sector and the accountants and the risk management people involved in this conversation, we're not going to get the investment we need. We're not going to recognize that it's going to take a bit of an investment, like you said, and to think long term, and to think about unintended consequences, and to think about, what ultimately will cost us. And I knew, and many of us would talk about that. And we're like, how do we get Wall Street, and how do we get the financial sector, and how do we get them? And I think that some of it emerged is from the insurance sector, because what happened was, all of a sudden you have these climate events and these environmental catastrophes, even going back to Superfund, if you have these terrible environmental catastrophes, look what just happened in Ohio. I mean,
yeah,
you have now burned this dioxin. Now that's out in the air. I mean, you may need to literally shut that down and cap it off. I don't know what the ultimate result of that is going to be, because it's pretty dangerous and very toxic. Yes. And really look at all the cancer we have all over the world and this country. That's from toxicity. I mean, it's not rocket science, it's toxicity in the body, in the system, in the environment, in our foods, in our surroundings. And I mean, off-gassing of everything. I mean, the things we buy, the things we surround ourselves, the paint on our walls,
everything is toxic.
The foam inside our couches. All of it can be toxic. And we shouldn't be surprised when our bodies respond to that, because it's not a natural, normal thing, just like nature knows. But I just wanted to end that thought process by saying that I think we really started to get the insurance sector involved, because they were having to put out a lot of money when there was a drought and a fire and a flood. And it's like, and they're going, whoa. We only had one hurricane in 1974, but last year we had 10, and now we have this many earthquakes. And so suddenly all this money, and then you have the financial sector going, whoa, we better get involved in this, because now insurance is getting higher. Now it's right. Where should we be citing ourselves? Where should we be? Where are the highest risks? What are the highest risks as it relates to people as well? Mm-hmm. I mean, if you've got slave labor and suddenly that comes out in our brand, think about the hit to our brand on that. Right. When I spent time at Mattel, and I remembered when they found the lead paint in the toy train. I mean, you had the whole C-suite involved. You had, the market hit us. Our stock price went down. People stopped buying. So these are real hits if we don't pay attention to this. And I think finally, what ESG really represents is that financial sector, that insurance sector, investment sector. Wall Street, not just Main Street, finally getting involed.
Yeah. And I think those are the people that those are the sectors that we need to push things forward, because activism pushes things, advocacy is important, but if those sectors aren't involved to actually create the investment in the first place, we wouldn't be able to push our agenda forward as much as we can.
Yes, Yeah. Our agenda is really important. Yeah. I heard this term the other day that I really liked. It's from he's a psychologist, I think, from UCLA, David Siegel, and he's written this book called Intra-Connected instead of Interconnected. And the intra was that you feel it inside and you also feel it outside. And I think that for those of us who are and feel so connected to nature, and that came from that place where it was our comfort space, or we go out and we see so much wonder and awe when you look at nature, and it makes us feel connected. But it's also, we're connected as people too. Like when you and I mean, we know we feel best when we're around people.
You can't be isolated for so long. You have to
feel excited, that we feel loved by, that we feel connected to, and there's that, and there's that with nature, and when we're in that place where it's just like we're interconnected to everything, and it's a beautiful word. And then he came up with another word, which actually was pushed by a student of his. When I heard the story, I loved it. It was a student that from an indigenous tribe that said, what do you think it is? He goes, well, it's me. It's not like individualism versus collectivism. It's both, right? It's me and we. It's me and you and we. And she said, well, that's kind of, clunky. Like, is there a better word? And he kept trying to find a word, and he finally came up with the word "we."
We. That's cool.
And I was like, and I thought, see that, and I bet you, Tosin, that if you and I look that up for indigenous tribes in South America, there'd be a word. There'd be a word for that connectedness. There'd be a concept, because they know no different, and that is the reality. And we need to start listening to that reality, because that is wisdom. That is the wisdom that this world needs right now in a big way.
Yes. We we can go on and on with this conversation. So, but just to round up, can you tell us a little bit more about your PhD, your thesis, what you're doing currently?
Sure. And also, that I'm working. It's interesting where I'm working. I'm working at the Port of Long Beach.
Yes. Oh my! And we never got to talk about that. I was going to ask about those robots and when am I going to get my dog?
No, and I want to encourage people to get online, even on YouTube. You could look up I recently created just a short little video that's only like a minute or two.
Okay, we'll add the link to the description for this video.
Yes, that would be great. And because that link just shows that I'm actually working at the greenest terminal in the world. And it's because we have electrified all of the cranes, all of the equipment, and it's fascinating. It's like a big Legoland, and I love it. And because it just is it is an environment where we have demonstrated. We've grown from 700,000 containers to 3.3 million. And we've done that with metric tons of emissions going to extraordinarily deep cut in all of our emissions. And we're about to take on a project here in the next 1 or 2 years that'll eliminate 93% of the remaining diesel emissions. And we're committed to be the first true net zero scope 1 and 2, facility in the world of its type. So that's been exciting to be a part of. And and to be honest, I say that because it's put my PhD on a little bit of a hold because I threw myself so into it, but
it's for good. It's definitely great.
I started my PhD in 2018. I did the master's in learning technologies, and that was how learning technologies can accelerate sustainability and advance human rights.
Yeah.
And that was in 2015 and 2016. I took off 2017. I went for my PhD in global leadership and change in 2018, 2019, 2020, and 2021. And I did 9 credits a semester all through that time. And by the way, I got a 4.0 every semester I always got a 4.0 right through my master's and PhD for all my classes. I'm a perfectionist.
Pretty student.
And also, I remembered walking down the hall with my professor at one point, and he's like, Bonnie, I'm in this really difficult statistics, like multivariate analysis for, it was really advanced multivariate analysis. Yeah. And I'm like, I'm struggling so bad. And he's like, you really only have to do this. You don't have to go all that. And I just looked at him and I said, do I look like a box checker to you? I said, I'm a pretty much oldest person in the class. I'm paying a lot of money for this. I'm not a box checker. I want to learn it. Right. So I got to be, it's just been a lot of fun, and I love that learning. And so what happened was then I decided my thesis is really on modern slavery in complex supply chains. And my focus, I'm trying to put my focus on like 4 commodities: cotton, cobalt, chocolate, and coffee. And because it's at the first mile that we really do see modern slavery, child labor, slaves that are working for nothing or very little and really being exploited, and really, their environments are being degraded and their bodies are being hurt. And by providing us these things we all enjoy every day, and
people eat chocolate and
I've yet to
coffee every day.
And honestly, I really feel, and we are on our phones every day with the cobalt,
right?
And we're wearing the cotton clothes, and and it's just, and yet we don't see that. I've yet to find a supply chain that's clean. I've yet to find a supply chain that doesn't have environmental pollution and exploitation of people.
Wow.
I don't care what it is. It's fishing, it's tuna fish, and it's fish in Thailand where there's 130,000 vessels and 50,000 have slave labor on them. It's mica that's in our makeup and in our car paint and in our appliance paint, and it's in India where children and women are slaving over this. And so it's really just not okay for us to not be aware of this and to wake up and see that these people too need to participate. These people too need to get a better life. These people too need to be safer, and they need to have shelter and have food. And that a person, if they mine cobalt their whole lives, they need to own a cell phone, be able to own a cell phone. And so it's just really, that's my goal, is is to wake people up and bring transparency to that. And so that's my PhD. And I believe that, I enjoy working with students and helping them see these things. I mean, half the time they look and they think, how do you stay so happy and energetic when you
despite all these things that you see? Yeah.
And my response to that is, again, I'm a stubborn optimist and I remain hopeful. And I do think that when we make things transparent and we see things, that we will take action.
Yeah.
What's necessary now is not just awareness, action.
Action. Yeah, I think that's the stage where we're at right now. It's creating. I always, when I'm thinking about telling people about an issue, I'm also trying to think of what action they should take. And my big goal is really like providing the resources. Oftentimes, like you hear about these problems and you get the first thing is to get overwhelmed, and some people will shut down just because of that. So it's finding the way to pull them out of that frustrated or trauma that they go through, and then help them to process how to, make the change. And just to round up, I remember one of the you made a quote at one of the dinners we had with Graham, which was that a child in, I can't remember the country you mentioned, shouldn't have to suffer because of someone who wants a couch in Minnesota or something. Yeah, that was sort of how you said it. That really, that stayed with me after that night, because truly with every product we're creating, we should think about, again, it's who exactly is making these things. For me, I started with fashion, and then I realized, because I also made clothes myself and I knew how long it took me to make them, and so I could imagine how a child or a woman would just sit on a sewing machine hours and hours,
18 to 20 hours a day, and doesn't even sleep, and to feed their children. And I think about that, for us to think also of the root causes of some of these problems. Of course, there's poverty, and there's no access to education, and really without safety and shelter and food, you can't even think about the education. And so we have to get to a place where we recognize that, this whole thing that we have going on right now with migration and immigration and migrants and people pushing away, and saying, we can't take them, we don't want them, they're illegally coming across. It's like, think about that mother that, first of all, she lived in Nicaragua or Honduras, and she grew the produce that we've been eating in the winter. We shouldn't be eating peaches and some of these things in the winter, but we're getting from those lands. But now, because of climate change, there's such a drought.
They are also disproportionately affected.
Fruit. She can't grow that food anymore. And so she has 3 children and they're starving. And she's going to risk her life to come over this border. She's potentially going to get raped. She's going to get robbed. She's going to come here illegally to be a maid to somebody so she can feed her children back home. Like, how do we turn that away? And how do we not see that that's how we came to these countries, and that these people should be given a chance? And more importantly, how do we forget that if these people don't come, and we don't take the time to train them and upskill them and invite them, and that we won't have Social Security, because we won't even be able to pay for ourselves, as we get older, because there's nobody working into the system. So invite these migrants and train them and be part, and let them be part of our system and pay taxes and do, but we have to help, and we have to serve, and we have to be open-hearted. And I don't know whether, I say we have to, but it's like, I'm imploring everybody to just think with open minds and open eyes and open hearts, and move from our heads to our hearts, to our hands, and take action, because the time is now.
It is. Yes. Well, that's mic drop. We'll head with that.
Mic drop. Boom.
The time is now.
The time is now, and the future is now. All right. Thank you so much. I really appreciated this time. It's always a pleasure to be with you, Tosin, and
same too.
And I hope that your audience enjoys. And certainly, I'm all over LinkedIn, and people I invite anybody to reach out, because I'm invested in regeneration, next generation, in the future, and I will always make myself available.
Definitely. And yes, I can attest to that. Bonnie is awesome. And I will add the Long Beach container terminal video in the video description, and also the links to your LinkedIn and your profile as well. Yeah. And
anybody who wants to take my course, I'm starting in April at UCLA at the extension.
Right.
All right. Thanks so much.
Right. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thanks so much for listening to the Sustainability Nuggets podcast. I am Rarsu Maribi.
And I am Tosin Folorunsho. If you enjoy this podcast, please leave a rating and review on wherever you listen to your podcast.
You can also show your support by signing up for a small donation to help sustain future episodes. You can find all relevant links in the description. See you in our next episode.